Imagine Boston, 1919, a bustling city, a hub of commerce and industry. On the cusp of a new era, horses and motorcars share the cobblestone streets. In the city's dense North End neighborhood, a colossal steel structure loomed over the waterfront, an unnatural addition to the landscape. This was the Purity Distilling Company's molasses tank. It stood 50 feet tall and 90 feet wide, a giant among the brick buildings. Inside, it held an astonishing 2.3 million gallons of crude molasses, a key ingredient for industrial alcohol production. This thick, syrupy substance was destined for distilleries, part of a booming industry. To the locals, the tank was just a strange, imposing landmark. It was a common sight, a part of their daily lives. Few understood the immense pressure contained within its steel walls. The neighborhood was a mix of residential homes, warehouses, and stables. Life carried on as normal in the shadow of the industrial giant. It was January 15th, 1919. The day began with an unseasonable warmth, a brief respite from the harsh Boston winter. A fresh shipment of molasses had recently arrived from the Caribbean, topping off the already full container. The stage was set for disaster. No one in the bustling North End could have predicted that their world was about to be submerged in a sticky, sweet catastrophe. The tank was not silent. For years, residents had reported hearing unsettling sounds coming from the massive steel container. They described deep groans and metallic rumbles, as if the structure was straining under an immense, invisible weight. More visibly, the tank leaked. It was a poorly kept secret that dark, sticky molasses constantly seeped from its seams. Local youngsters would often collect the sweet runoff in jars, a dangerous game played in the shadow of the failing structure. Instead of addressing these serious structural flaws, the company took a cosmetic approach to the problem of the leaks. They ordered the entire tank to be painted a dark, brownish-red color, the same color as the molasses itself. This superficial fix did nothing to stop the leaks. It only served to camouflage them from casual observers. The company, United States Industrial Alcohol, rushed its construction and never even filled it with water to test for leaks. These clear warning signs, from audible groans to visible leaks, were consistently ignored by those in charge. The pressure continued to build, both literally and figuratively, as the fateful day approached, with each ignored warning adding to the inevitable. Just after noon, lunch pails in hand, the city was taking a midday pause. That's when the groaning stopped. It was replaced by a sound that witnesses described as a roar, a thunderclap-like boom that echoed through the streets. The steel rivets holding the tank's plates together began to pop, firing like projectiles into the nearby buildings. In an instant, the fatigued steel walls of the giant tank gave way. The structural failure was catastrophic and immediate. The ground shook as if a train were crashing through the neighborhood. The tank seemed to lift from its foundation. Then, the walls split apart entirely. Over 2 million gallons of molasses, a dense, viscous fluid, was suddenly unleashed. It didn't just spill. It burst forth with incredible force, forming a colossal wave of dark, sticky liquid. This was not a slow ooze. This was a tsunami of sugar, estimated to be 25 feet high at its peak. It moved with terrifying speed, crashing forward at an estimated 35 miles per hour, faster than anyone could run. The entire contents of the tank emptied in seconds, launching a destructive torrent into the heart of the unsuspecting neighborhood. The wave of molasses hit with the force of a battering ram. Its density, far greater than water, gave it immense destructive power. A nearby firehouse, Engine 31, was one of the first structures to be hit. The building was pushed partially off its foundation. Houses and tenements along Copp's Hill Terrace were smashed into splinters, the force of the wave too great for their wooden frames. The wave was so powerful, it lifted a freight train car off its tracks and hurled it against a building. It also buckled the steel support beams of the Boston Elevated Railway's Atlantic Avenue structure, twisting them like paper. People and horses in the street were caught completely unaware, swept up by the fast-moving, sticky tide. The air filled with debris. Splintered wood, bricks, and the contents of demolished warehouses were all churned within the wave. The initial roar of the collapse was followed by a horrifying symphony of crashing buildings and twisting metal. The wave reached the waterfront, pouring into the harbor and turning a section of the bay a murky brown. In just a few moments, a 2-block area of Boston was completely devastated, buried under a thick blanket of industrial sweetener. As quickly as it began, the wave's forward momentum slowed. The unseasonably warm air began to cool in the late afternoon. As the temperature dropped, the molasses began to thicken, changing from a fluid wave into a thick, inescapable mire. This created a new, horrifying problem. The substance acted like quicksand, trapping anyone and anything caught within it. The sweet smell of molasses now mixed with the dust of destroyed buildings, a sickly sweet scent that hung over the area. Survivors were coated in the sticky brown goo, making movement nearly impossible and identification difficult. The scene was one of surreal destruction. Familiar streets were gone, replaced by a lumpy, brown, sticky wasteland. Wounded horses, trapped in the mire, were a common and distressing sight for the first responders arriving on the scene. The molasses was waist-deep in some areas, a formidable and exhausting obstacle for anyone trying to navigate the disaster zone. The disaster resulted in 21 tragic losses of life and left over 150 individuals with serious injuries. The immediate challenge was immense: how to rescue the living from a city landscape that had turned into a giant, sticky trap. Within minutes, the first wave of help arrived. 116 cadets from the USS Nantucket, docked nearby, ran towards the chaos. They were among the first on the scene, wading into the sticky mess to pull victims to safety. Boston police, firefighters, and Red Cross nurses quickly followed, setting up makeshift triage centers on cleaner ground. Rescue was a slow, agonizing process. Each step through the thick, cooling molasses required a monumental effort. Rescuers found that the molasses would pull boots right off their feet, forcing many to work barefoot in the hazardous debris. Doctors and nurses worked tirelessly, cleaning the sticky coating from survivors to assess and treat their injuries. They used anything they could find, saws, crowbars, and their bare hands, to chip away at hardened molasses and free those trapped beneath rubble. The search for survivors continued for 4 long days, as rescuers refused to give up hope, combing through the wreckage. Every person rescued was a small victory against the overwhelming scale of the bizarre and sticky disaster. The heroism of ordinary people and first responders shone brightly amidst one of the strangest disasters in American history. After the rescue phase ended, the monumental task of cleanup began. How do you clean a city drowned in sugar? Initially, crews tried to absorb the molasses with sand, but this only created a gritty, immovable sludge. The breakthrough came when they realized that salt water from the harbor could dissolve the hardened molasses. Fireboats were brought in to pump seawater at high pressure, spraying down buildings, streets, and the twisted railway. This washed the sticky brown mess into the gutters and drains, which then flowed directly into Boston Harbor. For months, the harbor water remained tinted brown, a visible reminder of the sheer volume of molasses that had been unleashed. Hundreds of workers spent weeks scraping and scrubbing every surface, from cobblestones to the interiors of damaged homes. The cleanup was a massive undertaking, involving over 300 people and taking more than 87,000 man-hours to complete. The sticky residue was pervasive. It was tracked all over the city on shoes, into homes, and onto subway platforms. It was said that for decades after the flood, on hot summer days, a faint, sweet smell of molasses still lingered in the North End. As the city cleaned up, the question on everyone's mind was, how could this have happened? An investigation was launched. The company, USIA, initially tried to blame the collapse on anarchists, suggesting the tank had been deliberately targeted. However, the evidence quickly pointed to a much more mundane and preventable cause: catastrophic structural failure. Investigators found the tank was poorly designed and hastily built. The steel walls were far too thin to hold the immense weight of the molasses. Crucially, the company had skipped basic safety checks. The tank was never hydrostatically tested by filling it with water. The rapid temperature change on January 15th played a critical role. Cold molasses from a recent delivery met warmer molasses already in the tank. This temperature difference likely spurred fermentation inside the tank, producing carbon dioxide gas and increasing the internal pressure. The combination of thin steel, no safety testing, and a sudden pressure increase created a recipe for disaster. The groans and leaks were not random occurrences. They were the sounds of a massive structure slowly tearing itself apart. The investigation concluded that the flood was not an act of malice or an unavoidable accident, but the direct result of corporate negligence. Following the investigation, a massive legal battle began. 119 victims and their families filed lawsuits against USIA. This became one of the first major class action lawsuits in Massachusetts history, consolidating all the individual claims into one case. The court proceedings lasted for years, with the company continuing to deny any fault in the tank's construction. The court appointed an auditor, Colonel Hugh W. Ogden, to oversee the complex case and hear the testimony. Over 3 years, he listened to more than 1,000 witnesses, from grieving family members to engineering experts. The plaintiff's legal team presented overwhelming evidence of the tank's structural flaws and the company's negligence. In 1925, the final ruling came down. The auditor found USIA to be entirely responsible for the disaster. The company was ordered to pay damages to the victims, a settlement equivalent to about $12 million today. This case was a landmark victory. It affirmed that corporations could be held financially responsible for public safety failures. It sent a powerful message that prioritizing profits over people could have severe legal and financial consequences. The Great Molasses Flood left a lasting scar on Boston, but it also spurred significant and positive change. The disaster led to the adoption of stricter regulations for construction projects across Massachusetts and the entire country. From then on, architects and engineers were required to show their work and have their calculations certified by a third party. The era of building massive structures without proper oversight or safety testing was coming to an end, thanks to this tragedy. Today, the site of the disaster is a quiet park and recreational area, bearing no visible trace of the chaos. Only a small, discreet plaque marks the spot, commemorating the event and the lives that were lost on that day. The story has become a piece of Boston folklore, a bizarre tale that sounds almost too strange to be true. But it serves as a powerful lesson in corporate responsibility and the real-world consequences of cutting corners on safety. It reminds us that even the most mundane industrial materials can become incredibly dangerous when handled with negligence. A wave of sugar that brought a city to its knees, the Great Boston Molasses Flood, is a tragedy that should never be forgotten.